Today we're out here taking a look at the brand new for 2014 Acura RLX Hybrid. This is Acura's second hybrid after the brand new ILX Hybrid introduced last year. And this vehicle uses an all-new hybrid drivetrain from Acura. This is a pre-production model that we're taking a look at here, so we don't have final pricing, but be sure to check back with us in about 2 months or so when we expect Acura to release that information. The 2014 RLX uses a completely different hybrid drivetrain system from Honda and Acura. This is not related at all to the integrated motor assist system that's been found under the hood of the old generation Honda Accord as well as the Acura ILX and the Honda Civic. And it's not related to the brand new system being found in the brand new Honda Accord either. Instead, this is a brand new all-wheel drive 3-motor generator system. When Acura shocked the world with their new design language on that old TL with its very aggressive and very large beak, I wasn't really that big of a fan of it, but I think that the design overall has aged fairly well, and the latest iterations of this Acura design language have gotten a lot softer. The beak is just a little bit better integrated into the overall design of the vehicle, and I find the Acura RLX fairly attractive in this segment. I do think that since this is competing with the likes of the BMW 5 Series and the Cadillac CTS, I do need to include them in my opinions, and I think that the Cadillac CTS is probably one of the best looking entries in this segment. I also think that the recently refreshed 2014 Mercedes-Benz E-Class is very attractive as well. I would probably put this third, possibly tying with the BMW 5 Series. I do think the 5 Series is incredibly attractive, but I think it's also just a little bit sedate and not quite as exciting as some of those other designs, and I really appreciate the angular design language in the Cadillac as well as the Mercedes. Be sure and comment in the comment section down below and tell me if I'm crazy or not. The RLX has an attractive side profile, but there's no denying that this is a front-wheel drive based platform. And you can really tell that up here because the front overhang is fairly long when you compare it to something like a Lexus GS or a 5 Series or an E-Class or even a Cadillac CTS. And the distance between this wheel and the beginning of the driver's door is fairly short. So in terms of profile, this is very different from the other mainline luxury competitors in this class. There are a few benefits, however. Even though the wheelbase is roughly the same as a Mercedes-Benz E-Class and a BMW 5 Series, we have an awful lot more interior room. We also have a slightly longer body overall out back here. We have a slightly longer rear overhang, meaning that this Acura RLX is just a hair bigger than that standard E-Class 5 Series platform. It's not quite as big as something like an S-Class or a 7 Series, so it's kind of a tweener model. Out back, the RLX continues its restrained and elegant styling with hidden exhaust tips, and the only real clue to the fact that this is a hybrid model is right here with this super handling all-wheel drive badge. Under the hood of the RLX, you will still find a 3.5-liter V6 engine. This is very closely related to the V6 engine found under the hood of the regular gasoline-only RLX, as well as the gasoline-only MDX. This produces 310 horsepower and 273 pound-feet of torque. It still retains the 3-cylinder deactivation mode of the regular RLX, which allows it to shut off half the cylinders to improve fuel economy on the highway. Again, it's good for 310 horsepower and 273 pound-feet of torque alone, just the engine by itself. What's new is after the engine. Instead of using the integrated motor assist system from Honda, this uses a brand new 7-speed dual-clutch transmission with an integrated pancake motor. You'll find that first motor over there on the other side after the transmission. It produces 47 horsepower and 109 pound-feet of torque. Acura's implementation of their hybrid drivetrain is quite interesting because it uses a 6-speed dual-clutch transmission as well as a 2-speed planetary gear set to give you 7 overall ratios, and that's why they call it a 7-speed dual-clutch transmission. Basically, 5th gear inside that dual-clutch transmission portion is used also for 1st gear, so it uses that 2-speed planetary gear set to change the effective ratio of 5th gear to act as 1st gear, making 5th gear really 6th gear in essence, and 6th gear inside that transmission the 7th gear. If that doesn't make sense to you, then you really don't need to worry about that. All you need to know is that this is the smoothest dual-clutch transmission available on the market, and that's because of the hybrid drivetrain. We have that 47 horsepower, 109 pound-foot of torque motor up front here, and that combined with the two 36 horsepower, 54 pound-foot of torque motors in the back smooth out the dual-clutch motions. If you've driven Volkswagen or Audi or other people's dual-clutch gearboxes, then you notice there is kind of a funkiness in the engagement of the clutch pack. It's kind of like a manual transmission driving. There's always going to be a slight moment where there's a little bit of an engagement feel in the transmission, and you don't have that in the hybrid vehicle. The reason for that is we have those motors that help out this system. And basically, when the engine is then coupling with the transmission, the motors are driving the car forward, so that engagement doesn't have a whole lot of power behind it at the instant that it's engaging, and therefore it just feels an awful lot smoother. So the motors really get you off the line, then the engine can engage gently with the clutch pack and then take you off from there. The whole thing ends up being an awful lot smoother than other hybrid implementations. The rest of the drivetrain is back here in the rear. There are those two 36 horsepower, 54 pound-foot of torque motors, one for each wheel. But it's more than just one for each wheel because they're together in a single unit centrally mounted in the vehicle, and that allows them to have a clutch pack to combine them together. So that way when you're straight line accelerating, it combines the clutch packs. That way both wheels are getting an absolutely even amount of power for good straight line performance. But it can then decouple them for the super handling all-wheel drive trick known as torque vectoring. This is something that you'll find in something like a BMW X5M or X6M, as well as a number of performance cars. Basically, it allows the vehicle to overdrive a wheel to give you a better turn feel. It helps relieve some of that front-wheel drive feel that you get in an RLX or other front-wheel drive vehicles, where it feels like the front of the vehicle is just unwilling to turn. By powering that outside rear wheel, it causes the car to pivot around the corner in a kind of a unique fashion. But what's big about the Acura RLX's super handling all-wheel drive system in this hybrid version is that it can also drag the wheel. Regular torque vectoring systems only work when the power is being applied, and that was really obvious in the old Acura RL because when the power was on, it felt really nimble on winding mountain roads. It really felt like it was really carving that corner very effortlessly. But when the power was off, it felt like it was trying to head for the bushes like a regular old front-wheel drive car. That's solved by this hybrid system because in neutral handling situations where there's no power being applied, the car will actually drag the inside rear wheel. It's kind of like when you're in a boat and you just sort of plant your oar in the water and you tend to pivot around that oar. Same thing's going on with this hybrid system, and it can then use that energy being generated by dragging the wheel to either recharge the battery pack or to power the outside rear wheel to help you, again, around that corner. Front seat comfort in the RLX is excellent. We have a multi-way power driver's seat with a 4-way adjustable lumbar support, which I really find very helpful. This passenger seat has the same range of motion as the driver's seat, which is also something that is unusual for Acura, as most of their vehicles tend to have a more limited range of motion for the front passenger seat. We have a 4-way tilt telescoping steering wheel, also with a decent range of motion and a very soft leather rim. The front-wheel drive platform of the RLX really helps out rear space. Because although this has relatively similar proportions to its competitors, we have over 2 inches more rear legroom. This front seat is adjusted for me comfortably at 6 feet tall, so you can see I have about 6 inches of legroom left there. If I move over to the right side, this front seat is all the way back in its track, and I still have several inches of legroom left there. An awful lot more legroom than you'd find in your typical E-Class 5 Series vehicle. We have a very comfortable center armrest back here with drink holders. However, if I move to the middle seat, you won't find much more room here than you would in a 5 Series or E-Class. My head is touching the ceiling actually to stand or sit upright. I do have to cock my head to one side, and that's because these rear bench seats are very bucket shaped in reality. It's a fairly high bump right here in this middle seat. We also have a fairly intrusive center console in the vehicle, and that's because the electronic control unit for the hybrid drive system is right here in the middle, where a drive shaft would normally be in a typical vehicle. Let's take a quick spin around the interior. We have height adjustable seat belts there. We have these very comfortable heated and cooled seats in our RLX hybrid tester. And then moving across to the dashboard, we are in a two-tone model, so you can get this in a single tone where it's black here as well as black there, or you can get it black upper and the ivory lower, or in our particular vehicle we have this sort of taupe colored top with the ivory colored leather dashboard. Very attractive look. Beautiful stitching there. This is fake wood trim all around the RLX. Real wood trim is not offered at this time in the United States, at least. We're not sure if it will be offered in Canada because the current generation Acura MDX does have a real wood trim package, but only in Canada. Moving across to the dashboard, we have this dual screen infotainment system, which you've seen in other Acura models. We have this 8-inch screen right here and a 7-inch haptic feedback touchscreen right here. That means it vibrates when you touch it. Go ahead and click down below for our infotainment review of the 2014 RLX. We don't want to clutter up this video with that. Below that, we have our controls for the climate control system right here. And these are all the controls for this large 8-inch screen up here. So you'd think that the 7-inch screen would control that screen, but it kind of sort of does. You end up having to use both this screen as well as these physical buttons in order to control that main screen. Again, more in the infotainment video. Down here we have our heated and cooled seats, little storage cubby there, 2 large drink holders. These easily can accommodate the largest drinks you can throw at them. And right here we have Acura's new shifter assembly. I'm not sure why they went to this versus a standard shifter. I think that they're just kind of trying to do what's current and trendy in the market, and everybody in the luxury field seems to be cooking up their own new shifter. I'm not sure about this in terms of long-term livability, but let's go over how you work it. Here we have a button for park. For reverse, we press this button that way. Neutral is this button right here, and drive is this button right here. We also have a sport button that changes transmission settings, as well as a certain other few settings on the car, as well as the active throttle pedal, etc. Parking brake, and then our brake hold here. This keeps the brake pressure on so you don't have to hold on to your brake pedal when you're at stoplights. We have a large center armrest that moves back so you can access it in that fashion, and it also has buttons on the side so you can open this armrest from either side. Decent amount of storage in there, and that's also where you'll find your USB port, your auxiliary input, as well as another 12-volt power port. We have an attractive 4-dial arrangement over here for the instrument cluster. This is the hybrid battery charge level, and we have our tachometer over here since we're in the engine stop mode, but the vehicle is on. We get a little ready indicator right there. If we look up, we now have a heads-up display, which is all new for Acura. This is the first time they've ever had a heads-up display. We can zoom in on it so you can see right there. There is a hybrid status indicator right there, and there's also a miles per hour. Now that it's actually in focus, you can see that. Zoomed out, we have a few more buttons on the steering wheel. These are our radio control buttons, and these are our cruise control buttons over here. These are for our lane keep assist system, and this is for our radar cruise control. The heads-up display is controlled via buttons right over here on the dashboard. As you'd expect from a luxury vehicle, materials do not decline as you go rearward. We have a lot of soft touch materials here, excellent stitching. Everything here is nice soft touch material. And then we have the nice soft touch armrest as well. Like the front, this is not real wood, that's fake wood in this vehicle. We do have a manual sunshade for the rear passengers on the side windows and an electric moving shade on the rear window. The RLX's lithium-ion battery pack is fairly small compared to nickel-metal hybrid battery packs and other hybrids, but it still occupies a decent amount of trunk space, and it causes our trunk comfort index to drop to 6 out of 10 for the hybrid version of the RLX. That's compared to 7 out of 10 for the Lexus GS Hybrid, because that GS Hybrid has a nicer finished trunk and it's just a little bit larger than this RLX Hybrid in a more usable way. As you'd expect with most luxury cars, we do have a nice assist handle to help you close this trunk lid. With all the motors and the engine working together, we get 377 total system horsepower and 377 pound-feet of torque, which means that this engine combo is one of the more powerful hybrid vehicles in this particular class out on the road. The regular RLX went from 0 to 60 in just over 5.5 seconds. We haven't had a chance to test the 0 to 60 time on this RLX hybrid, but if I do, I'll post the time right down there at the bottom of your screen. It definitely feels peppier than the regular RLX, even though it is just a little bit heavier. Out on the road, this drivetrain isn't quite as smooth as the Lexus GS because it doesn't use that planetary gear set power splitting device that Lexus uses, which acts kind of as a CVT. Although people don't like the CVT feel, it does result in a very smooth driving nature. However, this vehicle does feel like a sporty car with a dual clutch gearbox, so very much like a Volkswagen or a Porsche or an Audi that uses a dual clutch gearbox. Very similar feel going on in this Acura RLX. We get fast gear changes. We now have shift paddles on the steering wheel that really do what you want them to do. In the regular RLX, the shifting manual mode doesn't feel that great. It feels kind of mushy. They're slow. It seems like the car decides whether it wants to do your bidding or not. And this vehicle isn't like that. Those gear shift changes happen very smooth, as well as very quickly and on demand from those paddles. Out on winding mountain roads like this, you can really feel that super handling all-wheel drive system do its work out in the rear, because it helps correct that neutral handling feel in this vehicle out on these winding mountain roads. The regular RLX still feels front heavy, even though it has that four-wheel steering system, very much like an Audi A6, which tends to be very front heavy as well. I wouldn't call this quite as well balanced as something like a BMW 528i, but even a BMW 535i can feel a little bit nose heavy at times. This vehicle feels very neutral. It also feels just a touch artificial, mind you. So it's kind of like a video game in a way. The car tracks the line that you want it to track absolutely perfectly, but there's not a whole lot of feel going on through the steering wheel when you're in the corner. But there's also no plowing and none of that typical front-wheel drive feel that you tend to get in something like a Lincoln or a Volvo or another all-wheel drive traditional engine setup rather than something like this all-wheel drive hybrid. Acura is saying that we should expect about 30 miles per gallon in the RLX hybrid, and we've been averaging between 20 and 28 miles per gallon during our day driving this car so far, which I think is fairly respectable for how we've been driving it. They're also telling us that this interior is quieter than the regular RLX, and I definitely believe that. It's been something that Acura has been accused of falling down a little bit on in the past, as having quiet cabins, and they've really fixed that with this RLX. The RLX kind of rides the suspension midpoint in this segment between something firm like a Cadillac CTS and something soft like a Lexus GS. I think it's overall a very good highway cruising feel in terms of suspension feel. As I said earlier, the steering, there's not a whole lot of feedback. It is fairly boosted, but do keep in mind that pretty much everybody in this segment is using electric power steering, so there's really not that much difference anymore between one vehicle and the other. The RLX employs a brake-by-wire system, and this is one of the best I've ever felt so far. It has a very good balance between regenerative braking as well as friction braking. It feels very natural in a way that some other hybrid systems, most notably Honda's earlier hybrid systems, just felt very artificial. I applauded the way the old RL drove out on the road, and that's definitely true of this RLX. This super handling all-wheel drive system does exactly as it's advertising. Power on situations, you can definitely feel that outside rear wheel powering you through the corner. But what's new about this system is that in power off situations where you're just gliding down the road, it can drag that inside rear wheel to help you turn around the corner, and it does exactly what they say it does. It really helps keep this car from plowing like a front-heavy front-wheel drive car would in situations like this, which is exactly what things like a Lincoln MKS or a Volvo S80 do just a little bit. Their all-wheel drive systems definitely help them out, but you still have that front-heavy nature in that kind of vehicle. And amazingly enough, this Acura RLX definitely solves that problem. Because there's no mechanical connection between the engine and the rear wheels, the amount of power that can be sent to the rear is somewhat limited when you compare it to most other mechanical all-wheel drive systems out on the market. Most of those other systems will split the power up to about 50-50 front and rear that are currently out on the market. There are some additional vectoring systems that will put more power to the rear than the front wheels, but the vast majority of them on the whole are about 50-50. That's not happening in the RLX Hybrid. It's more like 70-30 maximum in this particular system just because of the way it's designed and the horsepower output of those electric motors out in the rear. That means that when you floor the vehicle, especially around corners, you still get a little bit of front-heavy feel, and you still get just a tiny bit of torque steer, and that's because you're putting 310 horsepower to the front wheels and about 30 or so horsepower to the rear wheels each. The result is something that is better than a typical front-wheel drive car in feel, but not quite as good as those mechanical all-wheel drive systems. When it comes to cornering, however, the difference is night and day like this. So it's really just in those full throttle type situations where that difference is still very obvious. I tend to like all-wheel drive vehicles, but because this system doesn't completely eliminate the front-wheel drive feel of the RLX, I'm not exactly sure if I would buy this over a rear-wheel drive Lexus GS or an Infiniti M35. It is a very close call, however. If I lived in something like a snowbelt area, then this would definitely be my choice over those other vehicles because you get the sure-footed grip of the all-wheel drive system, and even though it can't send all that much power to the rear compared to those other systems, you still get the sure-footed nature of a front-wheel drive vehicle with that additional benefit of having the rear wheels provide some power to you. One thing is for sure, however, the Acura RLX is definitely fun out here on Highway 1. As I said earlier, Acura has yet to release pricing for the 2014 RLX Hybrid, but I expect it to slot in between $60,000 and $66,000. If you recall from my review of the front-wheel drive RLX, my biggest complaint about it was that it was overpriced. Strangely enough, this slightly more expensive hybrid version of the RLX should fix that problem, because when you compare this to something like an Infiniti M35H or the Lexus GS 450H or the BMW Active Hybrid, etc., then the RLX ends up being a better value. That brings us to the all-important question of would I buy one? Without final pricing information, it's very difficult for me to have a firm opinion on that one, but I will say that I do find the interior more appealing than the Lexus GS. I also find the infotainment system easier to use. It also is more powerful than the Lexus GS, and it's all-wheel drive, something that the Lexus GS right now isn't in the hybrid form. However, when you compare it to something like the Infiniti Hybrid, I think the Infiniti Hybrid has better sporting pretensions. It feels better out on the road, it's more connected to the road, it's rear-wheel drive just like the Lexus GS, but it feels a lot sportier to drive out on the road than something like this RLX or the Lexus GS 450. It's difficult to talk about the RLX Hybrid without also talking about the Acura brand, and that is something to keep in mind. Acura as a brand is not quite as premium as Lexus, Infiniti, BMW, and Mercedes, although the RLX Hybrid is priced not that far apart from those competitors. My bottom line is if I was looking for an all-wheel drive hybrid vehicle, I would probably put the RLX on my shopping list. I can't say for sure whether it would be my top pick in this segment until we get final pricing information, but it would be fairly high on my list. If you're looking at the Infiniti or the Lexus Hybrid, I would definitely put the RLX on your shopping cross list because you may find that the interior trappings and the interior design of the RLX is more appealing to you. I think that's really the strongest selling point in the 2014 RLX. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Be sure and click that subscribe banner at the bottom of your screen so you can be updated on all of our latest videos, and we'll see you next week.